very friendly audience. So it's lovely to be with you, Duncan, and I thought we would start to talk about the notion of why you're using film as an artistic medium, because, you know, I'm coming from, as a filmmaker, from a much more kind of traditional background in using film to tell kind of narrative stories, but you're using it to do something quite different.
It just seemed like a way that you could kind of get these things in, get a sort of narrative or a story, or the kind of layers that it just seemed to be, you know, in terms of how I thought about things, in terms of it just seemed to kind of be sort of appropriate. It seemed to kind of enable me to kind of make the work that I wanted to make. So.
Because your earlier films are much more kind of abstract, aren't they? You know, with sound and image, they're much closer to what we would imagine. You know, is painterly rather than the way that you've moved now. You know, so obviously at the beginning it was more kind of textural.
One of the first films that I ever made, which was called The Great Age of Rock, which was, it was just like it took like a 4-month period, and like fashion magazines and lifestyle magazines, and it was a history of the world made up of, I had to kind of read through them all, but it was any sort of reference to anything in the past. So, and basically the whole notion of history boiled down to about, went back to the 60s and stopped in the 90s at that stage. So there has, I mean, formally, I suppose it is quite different from the films I make now, but has always been an interest in archival material, found material, and also very early germ of like this, you know, of kind of negotiating how you deal with the past, or how you portray the past.
And so that brings us quite interestingly to Northern Ireland, which has been the subject of your last 2 films, but interestingly the 60s and 70s, with Bernadette, the film about Bernadette Devlin, and also obviously the John DeLorean film, which, you know, is on show here. And it's kind of quite fascinating, because why, I mean, obviously your background is you are from Dublin, but you've come to Glasgow to kind of make your life, having trained here at the Glasgow School of Art. But you're returning to kind of these stories of Northern Ireland. What do you think, what's the kind of draw there?
Before I made Bernadette, I made a film called Falls, Burns, Blown Fiddles, which used material from 2 community photographic archives in Belfast. And it was at that point, when I was going through all their material, it's mainly still photographs that they have, but they did have a small collection of video and film, and it was there that I came across footage of Bernadette Devlin, and basically I think it was at that stage it was 2 things coalesced, because I was interested. I had always been interested in that period of time, like in the late 60s, early 70s, because it seemed to me that it was, like, in terms of the sort of political landscape was very different then, particularly if you take the Republican kind of nationalist politics, socialist politics, very different from as you go on through towards the end of the 70s and then through the 80s and the 90s, that there was this, there was all sorts of organisations who basically based their appeal on, it was an idea of class solidarity rather than kind of sectarian affinity, which is how things sort of broke down as you go on into the 70s and through the 80s. And I think that it's something that, because it's this idea of unfulfilled potentials. It's also to do with, you know, where we are now, like in Bernadette was made in 2008, and I think even if I were to have made that film 10 years before, that it would have met with a very kind of polarised response, that people would have kind of put her, you know, she would have fit into one of the kind of extremes. So, and it, you know, it is very much kind of sectarian sort of parameters, but I think that now it's possible to sort of look at that, look at figures like her, look at that period of time, and appreciate the sort of nuances that were, political nuances that were present then. And then going on to John DeLorean, I have to say that I, initially, it's nothing to do with Northern Ireland. I am of the kind of Back to the Future school of that it is that sort of popular cultural reference, and that I was interested in that as this kind of icon of the 80s, or something that's become an icon of the 80s. And then, I mean, I was aware that there was a kind of a bigger story to it, and that there was the sort of Belfast connection to that. You know, the thing is that it's a real paradox. The car itself is a real paradox, because it's something that looks kind of it looks quite really futuristic. It looks like it just looks sort of laden with potential, but you know, once you get under the kind of surface of it, it's a real crock. It's because of the doors, it's really heavy, it doesn't go very fast, it accelerates really slowly, the windows are really leaky. And I was just really interested in the idea that something like that, which in terms of its essential function, you would have to say is a failure, but nevertheless has gone on to become this icon, this enduring icon of the 80s. And but I think that's to do with a lot of the mythology that swirls around that, to do with and a lot of the mythology that John DeLorean brought to the whole thing, and how he sort of positioned it, that people would project so much onto this, and so much kind of hope and expectation went into that. So.
And references to the American dream as well, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, interestingly, the film itself has 3 very distinct movements. I mean, we talked earlier and you were saying actually there's 4. It would be quite interesting to look a bit more in detail of the fact that you've got 4 films within the film in a way, and you change stylistically as it goes. Do you want to take me through what you were doing in each of those sections that are really quite radically different?
Like, say, the first footage in the film, which is from the 1940s, and the whole sort of conception of what a documentary was very different then. It was much more staged, used actors a lot of the time, or even if it did use people on the spot, it was quite contrived, it was quite set up, it was quite directed. And as we were talking about earlier on, I mean, part of this is to do with it's to do with the technology, to do with the I mean, the cameras were really cumbersome, so everything had to be kind of, you had to be sure that you were going to get what you wanted to get with the available light, and where you're having to haul the cameras around. But also, I think there was much more kind of an idea of, like, there's much more kind of paternalistic, like all the footage that I used came from one source, which was, there were public information films and sort of corporate films. So very heavily paternalistic, quite really objectionable now, actually. A lot of the stuff that you kind of sift through, it's about, you know, for teenage boys, about how to avoid predatory homosexuals, and they're very, quite kind of, like from you know, looking at it now, it seems really kind of quite terrible, you know. So. And you